Greetings, Furality Legends! My name is Gilboy, and I'm your friendly neighborhood fish boy, here to introduce you and give you a little bit of a crash course on how I approach creating content for this wonderful social platform we involve ourselves with and create content for. I'm happy I've gotten the opportunity to be here, and I'm happy to see that people are interested in learning more about this kind of thing, because creating 3D content is something I'm quite passionate about, and I appreciate the fact that I have an opportunity to help out any learning 3D artists trying to learn how to do the thing when it comes to various aspects of 3D design. There is one small disclaimer before we start. What does this panel cover, and what does it not cover? I will not be showing you how to create the model. This panel is intended for artists or people who have a model that they already have, but they are having difficulties understanding how to make it move properly. Or maybe you're just a nerd and you're really interested about the topic and what goes into making the content you enjoy in VR chat. Whatever the case may be, I'll be giving you all the knowledge I have myself acquired through my many adventures in content creation. And while I may not be an industry professional, I do like to at least think I know what I'm talking about. And I have around 7 to 8 years of modeling experience, so I hope that statement holds up. So, if anything, humor me, okay? Cool. So, the next slide, please. Yeah, there we go. So, where do we start? And how do you move that mesh? First, I want to give a little rundown for people who might not exactly understand what weight painting is. Weight painting is the process of taking an armature, or the skeleton of a model, and telling it what parts of the model it should move. Now, you think it'd be pretty straightforward. Obviously, the skeleton should move the part of the body that it's in. But, like, for example, the arm bones should move the arm, and the tail bones should move your tail. But, you probably couldn't see that. But models come in all shapes and sizes, so the computer can't figure out exactly what you intend for it to move and how. So, weight painting, next slide, please. Weight painting swoops in to save the day and tells the computer exactly how each part of the body should move when the corresponding bone should move. Next slide again, please. How do we represent weight painting? Blender's default solution to tell you what's weight painted and to what degree is by using this rainbow colored scale. Anything that's a deep blue isn't affected by movement of the bone at all, while everything that's pure red moves 1-to-1 with the movement of the bone. And all the colors in between are just different levels of how much it will move based on how much the bone moves. Does that seem pretty simple? All right, next slide. Let's see an example of some actual finished weight painting. This video I'm about to play showcases some of the weight painting that you see on the very model you're watching me use right now. Due to technical reasons, this is a video with a version of past me talking, so I apologize for that if you wanted this live. But let's go ahead and see what this video has for you. Playing on your end. So here we have an arm that I've isolated from a project that I've created to show you an example of weight painting. If I had to rotate this arm, you would see that it deforms, and it deforms quite nicely. Could use some work, but this is completely serviceable. And if I go into weight paint mode, we can see what exactly is going on under the hood. If you look at the arm, you'll see that a large portion of it is red, and that's pretty typical. You'll want most of your bone, if it's a long part of the body or a long bone, to be red, because most of it is not going to be affected by another bone, realistically.
It's just this main bone that's going to be moving it, and that will move one-to-one with the bone. It will not deform. It will stay as it was modeled. And then as you look at the rest of the gradient, it goes from yellow, green, teal, and then the dark blue, which means nothing, no influence. But you can see how it's smoothing out, and it's starting to follow the direction of this bone, because as you can see, it has been smoothed the other way. So there's two gradients meeting in the middle, and they always equal 100 bone influence. So wherever there's some smoothing, on the other side there is an amount of smoothing that adds up to 100 exactly. And that's how the smoothing works. So this part of the arm is more influenced by the forearm than the actual arm, upper arm. And that's what's creating that smoothing. If I smooth that out a bit more, it would probably transition a bit better, right? If it was more in the middle. And that's something you have to look out for. But that's basically how weight painting works. It's just painting a series of, just painting a gradient and refining it until it looks right.
All right, so we can go to the next slide real quick. There are some, excuse me, there are some important things to note before you yourself begin your adventure of becoming the greatest weight painter to ever weight paint. And that is, you want to keep in mind some settings you want to make sure is enabled or disabled before you begin the deed. First off, ensure that accumulate is turned off. What this basically means is that it will constantly, continuously apply a higher, basically brush strokes will apply on top of each other while you're painting your weights. And that can lead to some undesired effects. Usually, accumulate should always be turned off, but by default, I believe it's turned on. So make sure you turn that off before you start. Additionally, Vertex Group X will mirror your weight painting across both sides. For example, I only had to weight paint my right arm, and my left arm copies those weight paints with Vertex Group X enabled under your symmetry settings. Your bones need to be named specifically. For example, I have upper bone dot left and upper bone dot right. They need to have the dot R or dot L in order to be mirrored over to the other side. So that's important to keep in mind. And lastly, auto normalize should definitely be enabled. That basically makes it so that the influence of any part of your model always adds up to 100 exactly. It's very technical as to why this is important, but let me just say it in this way. If you have a part of your model that, say, has an influence of 100 from one bone and an influence of 100 from another bone, that adds up to 200. That means your mesh follows both bones one-to-one. You can probably see why this would cause a problem. It can't follow either of those one-to-one because it's also being affected by another bone. So it'll do weird things to your model to try and figure itself out. It's best to keep this on at all times while weight painting, as it basically just saves you a large headache and from you having to completely redo your weight paints. And for the next slide, I have an additional video where I go over the actual process of weight painting on a simple object, which will stand in for an arm. It's a pretty simplified example, but you can apply this throughout your entire model and get very decent results, as long as you just keep working on it and keep doing what I am showing you in the video, all right? But after this video plays, I'll be answering some questions and giving some additional info before that.
So let's go over the basic workflow of weight painting. So for this, I have a cylinder that is not yet weight painted at all. In fact, it's not even connected to the armature yet. And then I have a 2-bone armature. And this is basically just going to be like the arm of our mesh. As you can see, it does not move yet. First, I'm going to click on the cylinder, shift click on the bone, and do Armature Deform, and I'm going to use empty groups. Now, if you notice, in pose mode, it's not going to move anything yet, because we haven't defined the weight painting. So in order to define the weight painting, I'm going to click on the model, and I'll notice there's two bone vertex groups, bone and bone 001, because I haven't named these bones. These vertex groups correspond to the name of the bones themselves. That way you know what bone you're working on when you're weight painting. So with the model selected, I'm going to go up to object mode, and I'm going to change it to weight paint mode. I'm also going to change it to wireframe to make the weight painting more visible. And then I'm just going to go into a side view like this, and I'm going to start painting things red. And that should be your default setting. But before you do that, make sure you go up to this tab, you click on Advanced, and you turn on, make sure Accumulate is turned off, and make sure Auto Normalize is on. This will ensure that the weighting of the mesh always adds up to 100, which is what you want. Let's begin painting. What I'm basically doing at this moment in time is I am simply painting the parts of the bone that I think belong to each bone. I don't care about smoothing them at all. I don't care about the transition. I am just getting the bones I want to move, or I think I want to move, marked. And I think that's okay. So now, if I go into pose mode, and I try to move this bone, you'll see, that doesn't look very good. It's clipping and doesn't look quite nice in areas like this. So how do we fix it? Well, how I typically fix it is I will then pose it in an area where I see it beginning to start problems, and then I will go back into weight paint mode, and I'll look at the weight paints. And yeah, this is not good. You can see on this side it's generally okay, but on this side it's pinching quite hard, and quite a lot. So I'm going to go in and select this other loop, because I actually forgot to select this loop. And then I'm going to blur it using this blur tool. And I'm just going to try and add some more influence to this other loop. And just smooth it out. Try and make it look normal. But always do it both ways. So I've smoothed it into this bone, and you can see it's starting to get a gradient. But let's smooth the other way on this bone. And even out that, and try to even out that influence a bit. Maybe smooth this as well. It's not smoothing quite well enough. Go to the other bone, continue smoothing. And I think that looks okay. Additionally, I'm going to go into my modifier stack, and you'll see that there's an Armature Modifier. Click on Preserve Volume. This will help your armature deform better. I always recommend you use Preserve Volume. It should be a default option, to be fair. So make sure you enable it if you're having weird deforms that you can't seem to solve. And let me just finish smoothing part of this. I want to smooth this. And I also want to smooth more this direction. Alright, I think that's good. So now, if we go into our object mode, or this mode, which is mode I made, we can rotate this bone, and it deforms pretty well. If this was an arm, this is very passable and very acceptable. It bends in both ways. You might not want that. For example, a bone has an elbow, and you don't want to be breaking your elbow now. But the VR chat itself will handle that for the most part. Just make sure you follow the guidelines in the VR chat SDK's documentation. And it should work out all right. Yeah, and that's a pretty good example.
That's me. All right, so I hope that video was informative. One thing I wanted to add to that is make sure you always pose before you test your weight painting. Otherwise, you're just going in blind. And then additionally, in the next panel, there was one last thing I wanted to talk to you about before I begin answering your questions. And this does look like a lot of information, and that's fine. But there's some VR chat or Unity specific stuff I wanted to talk about, namely bones. You may want to go ahead and start weight painting, but it's important to sort out any requirements your rig might need to fulfill to work well with VR chat. I've compiled a list here of the necessary bones needed for VR chat to play nice with your model and not sacrifice functionality. Every bone listed here is important, save for probably the fingers, but that's probably something you want. And it's likely you'll end up having 50 plus bones by the time you're done building your armature. But with perseverance, you can come up with a very nifty model. And trust me, nothing feels better than seeing your own creation move at the very end. It's the greatest feeling in the world knowing that you, with your own hard work and dedication, made it work. And also remember things like your upper arms, lower arms, hands, legs, and your feet. You only have to weight paint once. So you can probably cut out a few of those bones that you have to weight paint yourself. And that helps a lot. All right. Next question. Next. So I hope that my info, no matter how brief it may have been, has helped you learn the basics of weight painting. I wanted to take the rest of my time to talk with you all directly and answer any questions you may have or have had concerning the panel, weight painting, or even modeling in general. And I'm open to any Blender related questions, so don't be shy. If you have any question about Blender, I'm up for answering. If you want more, what should we go for more information on weight painting? If we want more, if we want to learn more, but not get overwhelmed. I can hear you, yes. Yeah. So if you want more information on weight painting, the best course I could give to you is probably check out some online YouTubers, like, for example, Blender Guru might have a good tutorial on that. Anyone who has a pretty good following on the Blender side of YouTube, specifically for animation. I don't necessarily have more up-to-date weight painting information like that. I know Blender Guru probably has one because I learned weight painting a long time ago on a completely different program. But I'm sure people like Blender Guru or someone along the like maybe CG Cookie. I know Flipped Normals, I think, has a good series on weight painting, I think. So you could probably look them up on YouTube, all free, and it's a pretty good resource. Second question, why not use the pose mode in weight painting mode so you can test your weights on the fly? Click on the bone first, then select mesh. You have pose mode in weight paint mode, so you don't have to switch between to test. Pose mode and weight painting mode are two completely different modes. I don't think you can be in one with also being in the other. Blender typically tries to stick to one mode at once. If that is incorrect, then you probably taught me something there. But typically, I always have to switch to pose mode to move the model, and then I just go to weight paint mode and touch up whatever looks like it's incorrect. Yeah. How long does it usually take you for an entire model to weight paint? Typically, it depends on the model. For example, if you have a character with wings or um, anything like a long tail like mine or these ears, sometimes it takes a bit longer. I've gotten pretty good at it. It takes me about an hour to maybe 2 hours to weight paint a whole model, and then you're going back and forth a few times once you're in the game to iron out any little tiny bugs you get. Like, for example, sometimes a single vertex on your finger might be attached to your leg, so it moves when your leg moves, stuff like that. Just small little tweaks after that 2 hours. So you might be working on it a bit, but usually it doesn't take that long. Can we use, this is all using the dynamic bones asset? Well, no. So Blender is before dynamic bones. Typically when you make your rig, you will prepare yourself to use dynamic bones in Unity. How, how do you how do you suggest painting fingers when they are often so close together? I have a big problem with this. Most of what I do is I just kind of suffer. I select an area of the finger I'm working on. I press the period key on my numpad to zoom in, and then I just try to be really careful. I know that's probably not the best, but that's the best solution I've found because everything else usually tends to add a few more steps, and usually I just like to get in there and fix everything. You could try manually applying weights edit mode, which you can do, but that tends to be a little messy, and it ignores the auto normalize and vertex group mirror, I think. Well, no, it doesn't ignore vertex group mirror, but it ignores auto normalize. So that you might get some vertices that have a influence greater than 100. So I just typically just zoom in really close and do it out of per vertex basis. That's usually what works best for me. From Lycos on Twitch, do I always have to start weight painting from scratch, or is there a way to add some base weight painting automatically to start working with it? Well, yes. So when you create the weight painting, I showed you to do it with empty groups, and that's how I prefer to do it, but there is an automatic weights option. It's not always reliable, and usually I find it easier to just build them all myself instead of trying to fix automatic weight paints. I find myself working for longer on the automatic weight paints than rather just doing them myself, because the automatic weight paint does not know what you're trying to do for moving your model. So you have to tell it what you want. It's good for applying some, but stuff like the face, like for example, if you have ears, it messes up your fingers a lot. Any bones that are really close, automatic weight painting does not really cut it. You gotta do it manually. So I would just start with empty, but that's just me. If you find it easier to start from automatic, you should definitely try doing that. For things like clothing that need to flex across multiple bones close together, what would your approach be? Well, for clothing, it's very, it's very complicated to do clothing. One of the things I like to do is I'll have a few main bones to, like, for example, if it's a skirt, maybe like 4 bones, 1 on each direction, then I weight paint and smooth that around. And if you need more, maybe more than that. But typically, sometimes if an article of clothing is really complicated, um, then you could possibly look into doing a cloth simulation in Unity. It's a little bit intensive, but it's a solution, and you don't have to do as much rigging for that specifically. So you might want to try doing that if your piece of clothing is really complicated. What are twist bones? Quite a few of you say they include twist bones. For example, twist bones for the arm. Twist bones basically make it so when you move your arm and you rotate it, it moves more realistically and it's more anatomically correct. Basically, there's just an extra bone in the arm, similar to how your actual arm is made. Your actual lower arm has 2 bones. So basically, they do that, and if you weight paint it right, it makes it look more natural. Yeah. Would a VOD this be available? Yes, a VOD will be available on YouTube at some time in the future. I'm not sure about that, the route time. How do you keep weights consistent for clothing? They may be separate toggle for the model. What I typically do is I will weight paint clothing along with the model at the same time, so I can integrate it into the same armature. Other than that, the first part is just to make sure that whatever armature your clothing is attached to is the same armature you're working on with your main model. So sometimes I'll duplicate the bones that the clothing will actually move with, and then I will apply that later in Unity. Other than that, make sure you have auto normalize on and that you have vertex group X on, because you can probably mirror weight paints if the clothing is identical. Yeah. Are there any specific issues or errors you see most when it comes to weight painting? Weight painting works with a projection paint method, which is basically it will paint based on what your camera sees while you're weight painting. So sometimes you'll get it so maybe you're working on your arm and it attaches to and it weight paints a bit of your chest or your leg or your face. And that stuff kind of needs to be ironed out, because it makes it so if you move your arm, half your face rips off. And that's probably not what you want, I assume. So that's the main error that I see when I get to weight painting. Additionally, if you ever have a weight painting that's higher, weight painting influence that's higher than 100, you'll see a lot of weird issues. Like, for example, the other day, I had my character's head was weight painted 100 on the neck and the head. So when I rotated my neck, his head would go backwards. And that's obviously not supposed to happen. So stuff like that will happen. But I've never encountered a glitch with weight painting that resulted in a crash. So at least in Blender. In Maya, that's a completely different story. But Blender, it's pretty stable. Is there any way to hide parts of the mesh to help only weight painting certain parts of the mesh? Unfortunately, no. When you try to hide an object in edit mode, when you go to weight paint mode, it will appear again and will be paintable again. The only way to prevent it from being paintable is to separate it into its own mesh and then hide it in your inspector. But that's all you can really do for that. I hope they add that soon, though. Do you prefer stick bones, or are there some cases you'd like envelop or other bone options? I always go with, in terms of what my bones look like, I always go with the octagonal bones, so you can always see which direction they're pointing in, because that's important. But in terms of bones, I usually just use octagonal bones, and I do use empty weight paint. I use empty group weight painting, so I just do everything manually. That's pretty much all that. Let's see, did I miss any? Let's see. Can we auto rig hands? Oh no, we got that. I think I did miss one up earlier. Is automatic weight 1000% trash? For some simple models, it could work. If you have a low poly mesh, like specifically low poly, it might work a little better. But I found when the polygon count gets higher, automatic weighting tends to do worse. So you know you can tweak automatic weight painting's algorithm a bit to make it work a little better. But I definitely wouldn't recommend automatic weight paints for like a full character model. If I have claws as a separate mesh from the base body, disjoined in Blender, do they move separately in VRChat even though I weight painted them to the same finger bone? When you technically it's always moving separately. But if it's attached to the same armature, it is acting as if it's the same. So if you weight paint claws, as long as you join it to the armature properly, by clicking on the claws and clicking on your armature, or vice versa, and then pressing Control P and doing anything as empty groups are automatic, it should work properly, and that should work pretty good. You shouldn't have to worry. Once you get it into Unity, you shouldn't have to worry about it if you do it right. What area of the body is hardest for you to weight paint? For me personally, it's transition between the legs to the hips. There's a lot of compact geometry around there. It has to usually move in multiple different directions while looking good. And especially if you have a tail that's a part of your model, like mine, it starts to get kind of complicated in that area. Other than that, I usually find the fingers also a bit of a challenge, but not as much. The transition from the hips to the legs, if you have a tail that's attached to your main model, sometimes will give me a bit of a problem. But usually that's pretty much it. Everything else is pretty straightforward. What would your ideal starter project recommend for VRC? My ideal starter project. I would try to make something that you can hold on a model that you've acquired already, and try and figure out some cool animation things in there, because that's a good starter. That's a good starter for learning how to model in general. You make an object, maybe it has an armature, maybe it jiggles around or something. Maybe it's like a gun. I don't know. Something that has an armature that could be armatured, like maybe like a staff that can extend, like what I have. This thing can extend like this, and this was all armatured, and it's a lot easier to rig something like this in VRChat than a full model. So anything that would make learning weight painting in general easier would be a really good first project, because that would warm you up for actual avatar stuff. Okay. Yes, so if you want to transfer weight painting from one mesh to another, there's a really handy modifier called the data transfer modifier. You can transfer vertex groups from one model to another. Just make sure that once you've done it and you've applied, you might have to fiddle around with the settings, like maybe you want to project the weight painting, or maybe using nearest vertex, which you'll understand once you look at the modifier. But the data transfer model is great for that. And just make sure you apply the modifier before you test the pose, or else it will look like it's not working at all. And also make sure that you parent the object to the armature with blank groups first, or else sometimes it won't follow it at all, because it has the vertex groups, but it's not parented to the armature. It's a very technical thing. But yeah, the data transfer modifier is what you're looking for. Do you make all of your models vertice by vertice, or do you use blobs and sculpt them into what you need? It really depends. So, for example, my previous model was completely vertice by vertice, and that was fun. This one I sculpted, but stuff like the ears and the frill, the eyes, the teeth, that was all manual, and I sculpted those all manually, vertice by vertice. Um, you can approach either way. Either one is valid. One takes a bit more time, but you have more control, a little less detail. Sculpting is great. What some people do is they'll model their models vertice by vertice and then sculpt on top of it, which is also a pretty valid technique. Do you have any advice for weight painting clumps of fur that do you have any advice for weight painting clumps of fur that move through dynamic bones? Yeah, so wherever it's attached, I would just weight paint it normally and ignore the bone that you've applied to it for dynamic bones, and then I would add a bit after that to get a little bit on the bits that move, because you probably don't want them to move too crazily. Excuse me. Like, for example, if you have fur on your arm that you want to move, I would just weight paint it with the arm and then go in after on the bone that actually would be the dynamic bone and add a bit of weight paint there. Keep in mind that dynamic bones by default need at least 2 bones in order for the dynamic effect to actually work. I tried to use it with 1 bone and it didn't work before. So just make sure everything that has dynamic bone is about 2 bones. You don't have to weight paint both bones. It just needs 2 bones to do the movement. At what point does VRC have problems with number of vertices, vertex count max? So the recommended triangle count in VRChat is 35,000. The max is 70,000. You can make it higher. I don't recommend, but you could, but you might get blocked by a lot of people, and a lot of people might not like it. So I would try to keep your vertice count anywhere between 35,000 and 70,000. Try and go for lower, obviously. If you can get even lower than 35,000, that's fantastic. Your model is pretty well optimized, and it also makes it easier to make a Oculus Quest version, because the Oculus Quest version, the face limit I think is 10,000. So that's yeah. Either anything if you're on Quest, anything under 10,000. If you're on VRChat desktop, anyway, anything between 35,000, 70,000, or lower. It doesn't need to be in between there, but if you can go lower, definitely do that. But yeah. How long did it take you to learn Blender? I always really found it hard to use Blender. Before they had their big UI update, I found it impossible. I used Maya for the 7 to 8 years of modeling experience. I used Maya for 6 of them. So I've only been using Blender for about 1.5 years, almost 2 years at this point. It didn't take me very long to learn, but and a lot of the stuff was different from Maya, but a lot of that's carried over. If you start learning Blender and you look up the right videos and you know what you need to learn to learn, you can learn Blender pretty fast, especially with the new UI and all that. They've made it a lot more user-friendly. It's a lot less of a headache. I definitely recommend the program. For things like cloning to flex ones together, what would your approach? I already answered that. What's the capital of Taiwan? I don't know about that one. I don't know. All right. I should have refrained from reading that one. I'm sorry. Any tips for new VR chat avatar creators? Definitely try to connect with other VR chat avatar creators. I've met a few really cool ones, and they're really nice. Um, and if you're just starting out, I recommend starting small. Make your first creation something simple. You don't want to burn yourself out. You want to ease into the creation process if you've never done it before. The biggest mistake you can make is trying to make your magnum opus immediately, and that's the same for any hobby, but especially for modeling because it can really get very frustrating if you don't entirely have a grasp of what you're doing yet. I would start small. My first model was definitely more than I could handle, but I powered through and I finished it. And it could be better, but it was good. And I simplified it where I could because I was worried about what might turn out. So I would start small, maybe small armatured stuff, maybe clothing. Clothing is a little easier because you don't really have to weight paint. You can just transfer the data over, and yeah, just start small and then add on to it as you go. And then with everything you learn, everything you try to learn something new and then keep that so you can apply it for future projects and build up your experience and you'll get better quite quickly. Anything you're excited about in Blender 3.0? I'm hoping they update the video editing because I use that and it was, it's bad. But for Blender 3.0, I'm excited for them to maybe update the animation system or something like that, or the sculpting. I heard they're doing something with sculpting, which is going to be nice. Have you thought of making furry avatar tutorials? I have, and how? I might start doing that. I have a Patreon. Um, I have a Patreon. I might start doing it through that or something. Um, I do really want to do it, and I want to make them available for free because I don't feel like paywalling it, but I feel like I might do something on PayPal, like if you want, on Patreon if you want. I don't know. But yeah, I do really want to do more tutorials. That's why I might do that. Thank you, Stitcheroo. Oh, can we go to the next slide so we can actually see some of my contacts? I'll still answer questions for the remaining 8 or 7 minutes. Yeah. So if you guys go to my Gumroad, you can see the link here. You can use Furality panel on checkout, and you can get 50% off everything I have on there. It's only 2 things, but yeah, it's only 2 things, and they're quite niche. But if you want to support me and get a cool asset, you can go in there and get something half off. It might be cool. But yeah, if you ever have any questions additionally, you can contact me on any of these, and I'll be there. I'll say hi. Any add-ons that help with weight painting? Um, Actually, I haven't really looked into weight painting add-ons, to be honest. I should do that, and can get back to you on that. Actually, I can do some research. Usually, I've always just done it manually because I've learned to suffer. So that's that's what I do. Is there any reasons to use skeleton animations over shape keying animations for transforming props? So, for example, with yeah, there is a really good reason. For example, for my trident right here, you can see it comes out and it moves out and it does all this cool stuff. If I used shape key animation to blend this, it would not move how I expected because I wanted the shape keys to fan out and then move up and move, and it's complicated movement. Shape keys by nature are really dumb. They don't care about what happens in between what you want and what it started with. It will just move the vertices in a straight line to wherever it needs to be. So if you have something that's a really complicated movement or something that is very complicated to do with, like, for example, if you want your character to even move their fingers, a shape key can't cut that because it doesn't curve the finger. The finger would collapse into itself and then slowly go to the pose that you set it at. So if there's anything that's complicated, you'd want to make that with an armature. For example, the mouth movements, that's shape keys because the movement is relatively simple. It doesn't move around a lot. It's basically moving up or down or in or out. Stuff like that is made for shape keys, but stuff like complicated animation or not really recommended for transforming. Are there any more questions? Okay, well, if there's no more questions, I will. Oh, someone's typing. I'll check. Oh, thank you so much. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, I'll end this here. Thank everyone for attending and watching me, speak in front of you all and hopefully not make a fool of myself. I have been Fish Boy, the Gill Boy, the Fish Man, all that. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your Furality. And I wish you all a good one.